隆重请出 Dr. John Turner 约翰特纳博士。Hi, John. How are you?
Hey, George. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be on the Training Master Series. And this is probably the closest we can get.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be part of this series.
Great. John, for our audience, we know each other for a long time, but for our audience, would you please introduce yourself? Tell us where you grew up, where you went to college, and where you study and work now.
Okay. Well, I grew up in the U.S. In the state of New Mexico. So that's right now I live in Texas. So New Mexico is just the one state over to the west. I started my career in engineering. I went to Maine Maritime Academy. So I studied power plants for on ships for the shipping industry. And when I graduated there, instead of going shipping, I went into the electric utility industry. And I worked there for 15 years. I worked with ASEA Brown Boveri for their utility industry for 15 years. And during that time, I traveled all over the US working on power plants. And then I worked 4 years international. I did 2 years in China, a year and a half in South Korea, 6 months in Argentina, and then the rest in the United States. And then I started a family, and then travel wasn't conducive to the family. So I went back to continue my education. So I went to University of Arkansas at Little Rock, because we were in Arkansas at the time. I got a second bachelor's degree in psychology. And then from there, I went to University of Texas at Tyler, got my master's degree in human resource development. And then I went to the University of North Texas, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I got my PhD in applied technology and performance improvement. And after graduating with my PhD, I ended up being a faculty member at UNT in the same department. So that's where I am. And this is finishing the 6th year as a faculty member here at University of North Texas.
Did you say that you worked in China for 2 years?
Yes. We're in the
Really?
Guangdong province. We were building 3 power stations next to an existing plant. It was in Hadong, Hadong, between Guangzhou and Shenzhen. So we take the ferry from Hong Kong about an hour and a half to Hadong, and that's where the power plant was.
Wow, is that great? So 2 years, you must had a lot of authentic Chinese food over there.
Oh yeah, it was very good. Henhao. Yep.
Yeah, great. 很好. Great. Thank you so much. And now you are a faculty member of the University of Northern Texas, UNT. And John, one of the things that you're known of one of your biggest achievements, I know your research and your study over many areas. And the purpose of Training Master Series is really to not only to learn the classic, like Roger Kaufman, like like the Kirkpatricks, like Bob Pike, and Robert Branson and John Keller. So there's so many classics there and so many gurus and ahead of us we need to learn, but also to pay more attention to the current inventions. And you're known for one of your notable works is the flow system. The flow system is very catching the eye, actually. Can you tell us what is flow system? What does it do, and who use them? And my serious questions: what value does it create, and how does it work, and so on and so forth. Just tell us what flow system is.
Sure. So I started a few years back. I started working with a couple of colleagues with Toyota Motor Corporation here in North America. So a little over 5 years ago, Toyota moved their headquarters from California to the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Plano, Texas. And once they got settled, and I met a couple of people, colleagues, and one of them was working for Toyota Connected. So it's the Internet of Things division for Toyota Motor North America. and they do the software programming for autonomous vehicles and other software related projects, not just for Toyota, but for other companies as well. And so we started working with a colleague, and we started looking at teams and teams of teams within Toyota Connected, and how to manage and structure teams. And so the big movement in organizations and industries has been kind of the Scrum movement, the Agile movement. And then prior to that, it's the Lean movement, which is really comes from the Toyota production system. And those have been real established practices and methods for working in what we call the complicated or predictable domain. So such as manufacturing, you know what the product is. You may have some problems moving through the product, but you need to resolve those products and then get the final product out to the customer. And that's more of a predictable process, predictable manufacturing process. But and the same can be said for like software development. If you know what the product should be, then it's more of a complicated product. So you have these methods and techniques, like in the software world, you have Scrum and Agile tools and techniques that you can use to help and aid that software development process. In manufacturing, you have the Toyota production system. And then in the organizations, you can even have Lean in organizations. So there are techniques and tools out there for the predictable, complicated domain. And so we, coming from that, and the colleagues had a strong base in the Lean and Toyota production system, that's where we came up with the foundations for the flow system. But what makes the flow system different from Agile, Lean, and the Toyota production system is that rather than looking at the complicated domain, some of the problems a lot of organizations have been facing in recent, especially with COVID-19, is that due to globalization and other unpredictable circumstances such as COVID-19, is organizations are having to deal with ambiguity, complexity. So we extended the predictable methods and practices, and we're putting together a set of tools and methods and techniques for organizations to work in and manage complexity. So we're directed, we're focused mainly in the complex domain. So the flow system offers a set of tools and methods for managing in this complex domain, which is different from the tools and methods in the complex domain. So we're dealing with more unpredictable processes. And then when we got together, we started looking at, well, what do we need to do in complexity? How do we manage complexity? And then within the organizational structure, we started looking at, well, leadership is a key component of that. And because when you're working in complexity, you're having to work with smaller teams, so you're going to team-based structures. And then so we started putting it together and say, hey, in order to manage in complexity, organizations really need to integrate teams with leaderships and then complexity. And you can't get there, you can't achieve your goals in complexity by just looking at leadership. You can't get through complexity just by working with teams, and you can't do it just by learning what complexity is or using complex methods. You really have to integrate all three of these together. So we call that the triple helix of flow, because we didn't want it to look as separate pillars or silos. They have to be integrated. So we call that triple helix of flow, where the complexity thinking, distributed leadership, and team science have to be integrated in order to achieve flow in complex environments.
Yeah. I'm gonna put this on the screen. So the triple helix of flow. Is that a typical? Is this chart the typical explanation or a model or depiction of your flow system?
It shows
is
the
very representative,
integration
right?
that's required. Yes. Now we have a model of the flow systems that's similar to the house of Toyota production system, and we did that just to show that it's built on the foundation of the flow system. And then for each of the helixes, so we have the complexity thinking, and then we have a box next to it that shows some of the different methods within complexity thinking. And then we have distributed leadership with the box, and it has the methods for distributed leadership, and then the same for team science. And we did that more for a practical standpoint, so you can see what techniques and methods are included in each of the helixes. But then you go to the triple helix that really shows how they're integrated into one. And so you get a view of the methods and techniques in one figure, and then the triple helix shows the integration of all three, which is required to achieve flow.
What's the application of the flow system? You mentioned the Toyota, the Toyota way and the lean process. So is this to interpret from my own language, is the flow system come from the Toyota way? I mean, or is another version of the Toyota way? What's the relationship between these two?
It's more the foundation, because we build upon the Toyota way and the Toyota production system on, humans with automation. Okay, so that comes from the Toyota side of things. Customer first, that comes from the Toyota side of things. And flow is defined as the integration of the three helixes to achieve value to the customer. So a lot of those concepts come from the Toyota production system. The main distinction is that when you're looking at complicated, predictable processes, then you have the Toyota production system, Toyota way, and lean and agile methods. When you're looking at complexity over here, those tools don't transfer because they don't work in complexity, and that's where the flow system comes in. Different tools and techniques for the two different types of domains: complicated, predictable versus complex, unpredictable. And then to kind of help explain the differences in those predictable, unpredictable domains, we use the Cinephone Framework, which comes from Dave Snowden, and he has the 5 domains. So you start in disorder, and once you're in disorder, then you start to make sense of your environment. Then you once you make sense of it, then you can decide whether you're in the clear domain, the complicated domain, complex, or chaotic domain. And so it kind of explains the different domains that you can be in. And so we're focusing on the left side of the Cinephone Framework, which is unpredictable, versus the previous tools and techniques that we talked about, which are on the predictable side, the right side of the Cinephone Framework. And we kind of contrast between those two in our book.
So it is so the Toyota way is more kind of on the they're the basis, and then they're controlled, and they're predictable, they're stable, and then they're controlled results. But for the others, and then you leave it to the flow system.
Right.
Got it.
And there's some overlap in between there, but
of course. Can any company use the flow system to sort things out? Because complexity is everything. I mean, is all over. I mean, with each one of the companies, and they each have their own versions of complexity, customers, the markets, regulation. Gosh, so complex. Can the flow system magically sort all things out to let the owner of the business say, it's not complicated, it's very simple. Let me tell you this: number 1, number 2, and number 3. Is that what the flow system do?
Yes and no. Okay, so yes, it can be applied to most organizations, and to your point, a lot of it comes from human behaviors, and what I mean by that is just because the system's complicated and we do it poorly doesn't make it complex. And so a lot of the complexity in organizations, especially, are human derived. We make our own complexity. Okay. Right. So if we add 10 layers of hierarchy structures to an organization, and we expect orders from the top to get down to the bottom level unscathed and clearly explain to the workers, and for them to know exactly what the top layer meant for the bottom layer to do, then there's a lot of transitions between the top level to the bottom level. And so the communication, lines of communication will get kind of distorted, right? So we create, that's an example of us creating the complexity. And so the complexity in a lot of organizations are, we developed and derived ourselves. And
Mhm.
so with that, the flow system can help organizations identify where the complexity is and how to kind of shift from the complex domain to more the complicated domain, because they have the tools and techniques to manage those processes in the complicated domain. But we need to shift them from the complex to the complicated. Now, the other part is where I said no. So if an organization, they have different departments, and some of the departments are more just clear processes like data entry and so forth. And those processes are simple, clear, and they don't really need to be changed to the flow system per se, right? Now, if they made those processes complex, then that's where the flow system could come in. And a lot of divisions such as research and development or knowledge workers are involved, then that's really where the flow system would come into play.
So in the triple helix of flow, and then there are three color lines that are like in spiral, right?
Yes.
Then there's a three set of lines, and they go spirals and all the time, like vortex, right? So they go up, and so one is complexity thinking, the other is second one, the blue is distributed leadership, and then the team science.
Yes.
So why these three? Why these three? Are there any factors that can help sort things out? Why? I believe you must have done a lot of research, and then you began with a lot of factors, and then you funneled down and then landed on these three are the most key to sort out the complexity.
Right. When addressing complex problems, it's better to have smaller, diverse teams, and that's from the research. So if you have a large team or a large group, then the outcome is more likely to be novelty or just more the same, right? Continuing with the status quo. But they really don't come up with new novel ideas, and that's where smaller, diverse teams come in, because they treat things different, they look at things differently, and they come up with something new, which is the process of emergence comes into play. So complexity calls for small, diverse teams. So that's where complexity comes into play with teams, right? And then when you put that into an organization, you can go to a team structure, but you need support from leadership to restructure the organization to support those team structures. And so that's where leadership comes into play. And so that's how we identified that those three need to be interconnected together. And then we provide what we call the flow system as a system of understanding, right? So we provide different options for organizations. So there's some recommendations under the complexity thinking, how to adopt it, different methods in distributed leadership, and different methods and techniques in team science. We're not prescribing that you need to do A, B, C, or D to achieve flow, but we're trying to teach people how to think differently and integrate methods from these three helixes and integrate them to achieve flow. And so that's our main goal, is not to prescribe anything, but to kind of get people to think differently and provide them with some tools and methods that they can try and find which ones work best for them, because it's very contextual, right? What works for one organization will be different than what works for another organization. And they have to find what works best for them. And as long as they integrate those three together, then they'll be able to get closer to achieving flow.
You mentioned a couple of times complexity, unpredictability, complexity, and also complication. So first of all, complexity and complication, they're different things in your description?
Yeah, complicated and complexity are two different things. And it goes back to there's different types of problems. So if you have a simple, complex, and wicked problems, there's three different types of problems.
Mhm.
And then in complexity theory, they look at ordered, unordered, and chaotic type of systems. So essentially, when you're looking at complicated, you're looking at there's some unknown involved, but you can find an expertise or someone who has that knowledge, and that's complicated, right? You may not
Mhm.
know all of the components to the problem, but you can contact or find someone who does. Okay.
Mhm.
And so that goes back to the example of the manufacturing. It's a process, it's known. And even if you come into a problem along the assembly line, you pull the end-on cord, it stops, and experts come in to sort out the problem. And once the problem's solved, then you continue and start the assembly line again. So that's complicated, right? When you get into the complex domain, complex problems, there are unknown unknowns, is what David Snowden calls it in the Cinephone Framework. And that means you don't know what you don't know, and you can't contact anyone who knows either. So you have to, that's where the teams come in. So because nobody knows, you have to get diverse teams, bring in all types of knowledge and experiences to look at the problem, stakeholders who are impacted by the problem, and then start doing probes, different small teams, small experiments as a sense making effort so you can start to make sense of the problem because you don't know the parameters of the problem. And then that's how you start to make sense and then try to bring it back to the complicated domain to where you have tools. So it's really on whether you know the components of the problem or someone can come in and add information to the problem, or if the problem is just completely unknown.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that different techniques depending on the type of problems or environment that you're dealing with.
Mhm. Is that the Cinephone framework that you're
Cinephone.
describing?
Yes, yes. Yeah. Cinephone.
Say that again. Cinephone.
Yes.
So it's pronounced as Cinephone. What is Cinephone? I looked it up and didn't find.
It's a Welsh term and it really means more your surroundings, your environment type thing. And so that's
Which
why it comes
language is which language is it from?
Welsh.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Dave Snowden is from Wales. And so that's where he came up with the term. Yeah.
Wales, Wales, like Britain, like in Britain, Wales.
Yeah, different from England and Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. It's one of the
Oh,
islands up there. Yeah.
okay. Wow. So it has a special meaning there. It's a, it's a, it's a Wales English. It's not English English. It's not
Right.
Scottish English. It's not
Yeah.
Northern Ireland English, Irish English, right?
Right.
Wow. Wow. They have, I know they have, local dialect in there. So they have their own words.
Right. Yes.
Can you say that word again?
Cinephone.
Canavan.
Yeah.
Canavan. Wow. Okay. So is a local language, I mean local word, and so what does it originally mean?
It relates to it's your surroundings, your environment, and that's where it comes into play with in the Cinephone framework. It's your, what domains are you in within your
Mhm.
environment? You have the 5 domains. So
So I'm also looking at the application part of the flow system. The most notable benefits of flow system so far as I see is that it is easy to use because it promises that it can convert complicated and complex problems into simple ones to help sort things out. And then you have 3 components: complexity thinking and distributed leadership. And then I want to go to ask you each one of them. You described a little bit about complex city thinking. Is there anything else that besides you have what you have already told us?
yeah, within the complexity thinking, we basically narrowed down to 2 steps to get started. So the first one is know what domain you're in or what type of problem you're dealing with. And that's where the Cinephone framework comes into play. And then once you know, okay, we're in complexity, then you start viewing things as a complex adaptive system. So complex adaptive systems come into play, and then we really go into the 8 characteristics of complex adaptive systems. And so you identify those 8 characteristics to better identify what the problem is. Yeah, so then distributed leadership, we're finding it's leadership that's distributed horizontally, vertically, and everywhere in between. And so we start at the individual leader development, right? So the individuals, you need to start developing individuals to be self-development and to learn leadership development as well. And then once you start developing individuals, then you bring in the teams, and then we start developing teamwork skills at the team level. And we use the shared leadership model within the teams itself. And so that's more distributed within teams. And then when you expand from individual teams to teams of teams, whether it's by product, by project, or what have you, then we have what we call multi-team systems. And then that's how you manage multiple teams. And then so the middle management, or the leader of the multi-team system, if you will, we call it the boundary spanner. And it's a functional leadership position. And what that means is, instead of the traditional leader follower dyad, it's the leader to team dyad. And that's a functional leader. So the boundary spanner manages the interactions between the teams within their own multi-team system, and they coordinate the goals. So you have individual independent goals within the teams. We call them proximal goals. So each team has their own set of proximal goals that they're trying to achieve. They also coordinate their activities with the organizational or the multi-team system goal, and we call that the team's distal goals. So a multi-team system is defined by 2 or more teams together with a shared distal goals, and that's how they're connected to the multi-team system. So the boundary spanner coordinates those activities, and the team coordinates the goals and provides the resources that the teams need. And other than that, the teams, once they're trained, they're able to function on their own as a self-organizing agent. And then above the multi-team system, you get to the executive branch. So distributed leadership is more of a hybrid leadership model. So you have the individual, the team, multi-team system below at one level, and then you have the executive branch at the upper level. So that's the lower level is the team structure that we talked about. So leadership needs to provide the support and structure the organization with the individual team and multi-team systems that we talked about. And then at the executive level, they don't need to really change their structure very much. And that's where the hybrid comes into play. And the only thing that we recommend is for the executive levels to take some of the components of either the instrumental leadership, strategic leadership, or global leadership, because those are the leadership theories that we found that support complexity and team structures. And if they incorporate some of those components into the executive branch, then they'll be better able to support the team structures that they developed in the organization, implemented in the organization, such as the multi-team systems. And that's, in a nutshell, that's the distributed leadership model. And then on the team science, we're pulling from the field of team science. There's a lot of research that's been done over the last 15 or 20 years. So, and we kind of try to synthesize a lot of that into the team science chapters in the book. But really, it's when you look at some of the current practices like the Agile and Scrum, they're really iterative processes on how to achieve tasks. But the one key thing that all of those methods skip is the teamwork skills, the interpersonal skills. And so we really hit hard on what is teamwork. So teams are composed of teamwork and task work. So everybody's just focusing on tasks, but no one's looking at teamwork, the teamwork skills involved. So for team training, you have to address both. So the team composition, for example, you have to make a team of members who have the technical skills for the team's task, right? So it's not individual member, it's the team collectively has to have the skills to complete the team's task. how they do that, the interactions between the team members, that's where the teamwork skills come in. So a lot of people get the people, one or two people with the skills, and then add a few other people and say, here's your task, go do it. And one or two people kind of lead the way and actually do it themselves. And that's what's going on in a lot of organizations. But what they're not doing is teaching people how to work as a team so that they can utilize the knowledge and skills from all the members instead of just pulling from one or two members. And that makes it more of a highly effective team in that case. And then the multi-team systems is also the way of scaling the teams, and that comes from the team science literature as well.
MTS, multi-team system, right? MTS.
Yes, right.
Good. And so thank you, John, for describing the flow system in such a detail. And the three components. My next question is application, because in any model comes out, either they're research-based or they're practice-based, but they all have to have the application part, especially on the other side of the world here in China. There's, not only in China, but other countries as well, that a lot of companies, they want to, so they want to grow and solve their daily problems. So how does, my question or two sets is, one is, how does an organization, where do they start to utilize this flow system? Secondly, do you have an example to show us and how does it work?
Accessing it as far as our web pages, or
no, where do we start with this flow system? I'm a company. I give you a scenario. I have like 500 employees and I have salaries to give out. So I need to solve, if I'm in manufacturing, I manufacturing, cashmere wool, sweaters. So, and then I have 500 employees and my annual revenue is like, 20 million or something like that. And then I need to give out. I have very heavy burdens of cash flow. So, and my competition is very, very fierce on the marketplace.
Right.
Can I, if I have that, and I have some bank loans to take care, to bank interest and bank loans and some, and regulations, and also have to face, the market, internet, e-commerce thing. So if I'm an owner of that business, can I use your flow system?
Sure.
How?
Some of the processes, yeah. So you would start like, okay, where's the complexity, right? So that goes back to identifying what type of environment you're in. So are you in a complex, are you in complicated, or are you just making complicated processes complex, right? So that would be one of the first places, is really find out where you're having problems, and are you just making simpler problems just complex by the other procedures or rules that you're putting into place, or different levels, right? So that's where the complexity thinking portion comes in. And the whole concept of the flow system is to bring value to the customer, right? So it starts and ends with the customer. So really, what are you providing to the customer? And so you could also, one of the other tools that we offer is like value stream mapping or Wordly mapping. So there's some visual mapping techniques that you can use to identify how things are getting to the customer and where the flow is being constrained, right? If you're delivering to the customer something they want, great, but if it's not being delivered in the time that they want, then it's not so great. If you're delivering it in the time they want, great, but if it's not what they want, then you have a problem, right? So we want to make sure we get the right product to the customer when they want it, right? And so when you trace back from the customer, you can find all these constraints along the way that are preventing you from delivering either the right product or the product in time. And so we really have to kind of map those processes out. And then you identify what type of constraints you have. So are they enabling the process, or are they inhibiting the process? Inhibiting constraints add more time and they block flow. And then sometimes you need to put enabling constraints into that process to help things move flow quickly, right? So those are some of the techniques we can add or look at, right? Sense making techniques is identifying future trends coming in by identifying weak signals in your field or in other fields and disciplines. Those are some of the tools we can add. And then within an organization, one of the things we look at is what we call leader's intent, and it comes from the military, which is commander's intent. And the idea there is to give your intent to your followers or to your team's subordinates of what is expected, but don't direct them. And if you give them the idea and then let them engage and interact and then work towards that, if they come into a constraint, or whether it's inhibiting or enabling, then they would have the freedom to work around that constraint to continue the process. They don't have to come back to the leader to get permission to go around a constraint, right? So giving them the freedom to work towards the leader's intent allows the flow to go quicker, because they're not having to come back and get permission every time they run into a roadblock. So those are some other things that are techniques that we could offer. And then how you structure the teams, how you compose the teams, how you lead the teams, those are all things that we can address as well. And we can really make not only just the teams more effective, but the whole structure of the teams, the multi-team systems more effective as well. And all that is
So,
designed to deliver more value to the customer. So it's all
and
designed with the customer in mind, right? So if you're
right,
changing processes, does that create value to the customer? And then you're looking
right,
at value added or non-value added activities, right?
right.
So if you're doing an activity that brings value to the customer, good.
Mhm.
But if you have activities that you're doing, but it's bringing no value to the customer, well, you shouldn't be doing those activities, right? Because
Mhm.
it's not adding value to the customer. So you take
Mhm.
those activities out. Now, there's some non-value activities that you need, such as regulation and so forth. So you have to look at those closely. But the idea is that most of the activities must be creating value to the customer. And if they're not, then you need to look at how to remove those activities from the process.
Right, because your first principle is customer first. That's also Toyota ways,
Right.
principle that you borrowed. I believe you borrowed over, from the
Yeah,
Toyota way.
and then we also quote Deming, where he states that there's no customer inside the walls of the organization, customers outside the organization. And that
Can
goes
you
back,
say that again?
there's
There's
no
no customer
customer
that,
inside the walls of the organization, they're outside the walls. That's paraphrasing, but
yeah, yeah. Of
that's
course, they're
paraphrasing.
all outside the walls, outside the organization. So my next question is, the flow system, the complexity thinking, distributed leadership, and team science, are these three, when I implemented, I'm that business owner again, and come back to that scenario. Do these three go in parallel, these three factors? I conduct analysis, right? The complexity thinking, distributed leadership, and I rely on team science. And then based on customer first principle. So are these three factors that go together, or are they in parallel? Or do they have, the first and second?
It could be either or. I mean, as long as you're addressing all three, so that
That's
you
right.
do over time get that interconnectivity among the three.
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
your biggest problem is in ineffective teams, then that's probably where you would start, and then you would have to go to
Mm-hmm.
leadership to get the support for the teams, and then so forth. If your biggest problem is in a highly rigid leadership structure, then you may need to start with leadership to kind of flatten that structure out a little bit and then give more control to the so the teams can operate more autonomously. So then
Right.
you could go from leadership to the team. So it's really, and that goes back to where it's very contextual for each organization, how they
Mhm.
use the tools and which tools are effective for them is very contextually dependent.
Right, right, right. That's about right. And what are the benefits of um, using the flow system?
It aids organizations in managing complex and ambiguous environments because the tools that we have today, such as the agile and the lean
Mhm.
tools, they're not designed and they don't work well in complex domain. So these are new tools and methods for the complex domain, for managing complexity.
Are there certain industries of the same of certain characteristics that are more suitable for flow system, or it can be applied to any sort of organization? Is there any tendency? You know what I mean? Because
Uh,
some is more
yeah,
suitable for some kind of a group of companies that have same characteristics, or it does, applies to all.
the more moving parts that you have within a department or an organization, then the more the flow system will be beneficial. And the reason I
Right.
say that is the more moving parts, more people involved, more agencies involved, then you're looking at what is defined as a complex adaptive system.
Got it. Got it. This is exactly what I'm thinking. Also, because what I'm thinking is probably is more suitable for like startups or even companies that are very in a very, very vibrant competition, environment, and
Right.
then and then they have to, I mean, daily changes there. So if but companies, businesses, every business is seeking for sustainable growth. So
Right.
is there any contradiction? I mean, if I use flow system to solve my problems, my question is, does it solve short-term, mid-term, or long-term problems? Because every company is seeking for sustainability, sustainable growth.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Um, I would say long term, and here's why. So a lot of organizations have moved to agile, and then a lot of organizations have moved away from agile at the same time
Mhm,
because
mhm,
it hasn't worked. And part of that reason is, so you take an organization and say, okay, we want to be agile and resilient. We want to move fast to the competition. So they
mhm,
take agile and they take one division and they use the agile skills and say, okay, we're good. And then
mhm,
they take that division and move it back into the original organizational structure, and
mhm,
then it fails. Well, it failed because the only thing that was changed was the one division, and when it was put back into the wholer system,
mhm,
it didn't align, and then they reverted back to the old habits.
mhm,
So you can't just take one small part, and this is goes back to really systems thinking. You can't optimize one part and expect the whole system to
no, you
perform
can't.
better. Sometimes it'll perform worse, right? So the flow system is a more of a holistic model. So it's not just doing one division or one department. It's really a holistic model, and that's why we really go into the executive levels and the leadership side. It's really a holistic model for the organization, and so that's why I answered that as a more of a long term.
Mhm,
Once you start and slowly work out, and then you'll start achieving flow once everything gets interconnected within the organization and not just one
mhm,
small division or department.
mhm, mhm. What I see is dynamics.
Mhm.
Dynamics in the more dynamic team environment is all the fronts are moving. You have many moving fronts, and then at the same time you're because a lot of companies, because their need to grow, their desire to grow, they're easily to move into unknown fields. That's why I'm trying to, dig into the flow system. How does it work? What it is, and when, and how, and that's why, because a lot of companies, if they want to grow, they have to explore the unknown,
Mhm.
and a lot of times they don't know. They don't know. That's what we always say. But
Right.
they try to do it to cope with that problem. Is that to make unknown known? And then even though they don't know what I mean, they know they don't know, and that's even better. They don't know they don't know. And then
Right.
they have more focus, and because every company's resources are really limited, they have to put the best resources on the key problems. And then if through flow system they can identify this or that is the next Everest we need to conquer, then they if they cannot go around it. They have to do. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's why it's what I see is a lot of dynamics. And then in the process, you have to constantly come back to the team, distributed leadership, and then and then team science, and then multiple team systems, and then so is a moving part, is a moving vehicle with all these three aspects on board. But you have to constantly come back and check and keep building, in order to move this vehicle forward.
Right. So good explanation that you just provided, because when someone's operating in the unknowns, they're
Mhm.
uncomfortable. All right. And
Right.
so when we have the traditional command control structure and leadership, when a
Mm-hmm.
leader's uncomfortable, they command it downward. Right.
Right. Right.
And then when things don't go well, they blame it downwards. Right. So the
Mm-hmm.
leader doesn't take the blame, they blame the people below them. Even though they were uncomfortable and they didn't know, they still
Mm-hmm.
pushed it downward and say, you deal with it. And then they were blamed when it didn't work. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what we're trying to do is getting people comfortable with being uncomfortable. Okay. In complexity, you're going to deal with unknown and you have to get comfortable with that. That's first thing. And then second thing, you can't command it to someone else because they don't know either. So you have to learn to get comfortable operating in that type of environment and sharing responsibilities, sharing blames. And then that's also where we go to it's safe to fail, because part of learning in that environment is trying things. And if it fails, you learn from that and then try something else. And that's the different probing experiments that are required in the complex domain. So that's safe to fail. So, and leaders really need to get comfortable with letting people fail to learn from it in order to find out how to operate in that complex domain. And then emergence and new developments, new innovative products can come from that process, but they have to get comfortable in that being uncomfortable.
So it is really a complicated system, and not only complicated, but it's really again, I really like the word dynamics, because that's all I see. Dynamics, because because your vortex, you're in like a spiral, and it keep moving and keep moving. It's like our solar system. The sun is not just there. It is also moving. It's also rotating around the solar system. So if the sun is moving, and then all the planets are also moving, it's not like in that circle, flat circle, but it's, if you look at it in 3D, it's like it's moving. It's like this. It's like moving like this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what I see. So the sun is moving itself, and then so the track of our Earth moving is around the sun. It's not like this, but it's like ooh,
Right.
right. It's like this, because that's the actual path, and that's what I depict. That yours is ongoing, continuous, and that there's a lot of dynamics. So you have to be very agile, and you have to be very quick, have a quick turnaround on problems. And when you encounter those set of problems, or problem with those kind of characteristics, and then you come back to the flow system and then say, okay, this is belong to this is belong to this one belong to this, I need to do this, and I need to get this sorted out. So that's how you convert complicated problems into simple ones, easier one. I mean, easy to depict, or easier ones.
Right. So when you're looking at complex adaptive systems, one of the things that's required is you don't control, but you manage the interconnections, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we come with the interactions between team members in teams, between teams in multi-team systems, and then with the leadership in multi-team systems and executive. You're you're These are ways of facilitating those interactions through the triple
Mm-hmm.
helix of flow. And that's one of the things we're trying to, and once you're facilitating interactions, you're kind of removing the silos within
Mm-hmm.
organizations.
Mm-hmm.
They still need to be in place, but they're permeable. They're not rigid boundaries, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you're really kind of trying to open up more interactions within the organization and bring down those rigid silo walls so that everyone's connecting with everyone.
Great, great. Okay, so much for the flow system. Okay, one more question on the flow system. Thank you.
Okay.
Flow. Why do you pick the word flow? Because it's a very, very, very vivid description of how it goes. So why the word flow? What's this from? What message do you want to try to convey?
Well, you want from the time the order is taken from the customer to the time it's delivered, you want it to be a seamless process. And that's one of the ways we describe flow. And so it has been identified as an individual construct. It's been identified as a social construct. And so we recognize some of the researchers behind those concepts, but we look at it more as a seamless transition from order to delivery. And to get that seamless transition, and that goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, is you need the processes to all work cohesively as a holistic unit, and you need to remove the inhibiting constraints so that things can move quickly.
That's a very good explanation. Thank you. Thank you. By flow is so descriptive because it describes, it draws a picture of the organization flow from ambiguity
Mhm.
into identity, from uncertainty to more predictability, you know what I mean? So from
Yeah.
complexity to complication, and then you can sort things out gradually. That's how, and it carries on the
Mhm.
the inertia to go forward, to move forward. That's why the flow system really catches our eye, because it is what the customers wants, because they want to flow. They want to flow with the history, with the trend, with the regularity, or with the law of growth,
Right.
either natural growth or societal, or in the nature. Anyway, okay, so much for the flow system, because I've been pounding on the flow system because it's so new, and I'm just interested because I consider this is also a creativity or an invention or another way of to solve problems, and it helps to equip our managers and with another set of way of thinking, and
Mhm.
another set of tools at their workplace to create value, to do what they need to do, they're out to do. So anyway, my next question, John, is okay, back on performance improvement, and you are the editor-in-chief about on most of the two most important publications of ISPI so far, the PIQ and the Performance Express. And so you have done a lot of work for ISPI. Thank you. So you have read aloud. You have read very well read, especially you are focused on performance improvement. What I'm trying to say, you have seen way more a lot than we do. And so what is your assessment on where performance improvement is, where we are, what challenges, we are facing right now? Is the future bright or full of thorns?
No, it's a good question. A few years back at ISPI conferences, I was trying to contrast the ISPI standards with complexity thinking,
You mean the
right?
10 standards?
Yeah, the 10 standards. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we go back to the flow system where we built on the foundation of the Toyota production system,
Mm-hmm.
and then because it's good for the predictable domain, but not complex domain, then we developed a flow system for the complex domain. If we look at human performance technology or ISPI and the standards,
Mm-hmm.
they're good for the predictable, complicated domains. And so the challenge is, okay, what standards or how do we move ISPI standards and HPT to be effective in the complex domain?
Mm-hmm.
Because the current standards will not transfer to the complex domain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are the standards or what adjustments do we need to make it applicable to that domain? Because a lot of organizations are dealing with complexity, and if the standards don't address complexity, then what will? And so that's kind of the gap that we need to close within the ISPI community. That's from my perspective.
Wow. Wow. That's really, I would say that's really deep. I never thought about that way. I
Yeah.
really never thought in that from that angle. So you used the flow system to examine where ISPI's methodologies have been and what is uh, the areas of improvement, and then what we need to do next. So is a vivid example of what the flow system application is. It
Yeah, it
right?
can be. Right. When we
It
first
can be.
started talking about it, that was in the early stages of the flow system. So I was
Yeah.
comparing it more to complexity thinking, complexity theory at that time. But the flow system could be one potential model or something to use as a model for SPI in that domain or something similar to it, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. So, in other words, the 10 standards in your assessment, is it fair to say the 10 standards, but does not solve organizational problems? Is that what you're
No, they
saying?
do. They do. It's just when
Mm,
you get into complex problems,
mm,
they're not transferable. So for example, they have systems thinking in the ISPA standards. Well, we talked about there's a little overlap between the predictable and unpredictable. So between
right.
complicated and complex, there's a little overlap. And that's where
Mm-hmm,
systems thinking comes in and complexity thinking kind of merge. So there
mm-hmm,
is an overlap, and that Cynefin calls that the liminal boundary. So that's the overlap between complicated and complex, right? So some systems thinking can be applied in there, and some complex adaptive system characteristics are there. But once you get into more pure complexity, high complexity problems, systems thinking doesn't work because you don't know. There's too many unknowns, right?
right.
So what will work? So you could replace that systems thinking for in complexity. You need to go to complexity thinking. That's one example in the standards, right? So, but you can't just apply the standards to all contextual settings. So the standards are good for predictable, but what about the unpredictable side? So complexity thinking and other standards would be required as guidelines to manage there, but we can't add a prescriptive model for complexity because it doesn't work.
So this is another example that one size doesn't fit all. The
Right,
10 standards does not fit to everybody,
right,
especially what you just said. I mean, my interpretation is my understanding is that is not like, especially the systematic thing, even though you have some overlapping, but when it comes to complexity, complexity domain, some areas that company does not have any certainty, systematic thinking doesn't work. You have to adopt the complexity thinking.
Mhm.
Wow.
Correct.
Wow. Because this is not a huge blow, but a very good makeup to the 10 standards, I think. And that's why I say it from another point of view, the flow system can be a very another side of tools when different companies, and they when they want to adopt to solve their problems, especially their startups, and then they
Right.
march into a lot of unknown areas, and those unknown areas maybe maybe rosy, and but the picture may not be rosy, but probably full of landmines as well. So
Right. Right.
anyway, thank you. This is new. This is new, and
Okay.
my first time to hear about that. Thank you. Um, so you also, as a professor, you are also conducting teaching. You're teaching performance improvement at schools, right? Right now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. What reform do you think the performance improvement education should make at universities?
Not to be a stickler, but it's still, you need to include managing complexity into the picture, and you also need to bring into more team science. Because organizations are operating under team structures today, and so performance improvement needs to have a little more focus on the team side of things for organizations, for them to be effective within organizations. Some of the things that we were working on at the university level is we've been working on a concentration in one of the MBAs. So we've been working with the College of Business and the new college at Frisco here at UNT, and we're looking at offering a MBA with a concentration in managing complexity. And so within that concentration, we'll have the components of complexity thinking, and then also the other components of flow system, along with strategy and a few other courses. So that'll be 4 courses for that concentration. So that would help kind of introduce these concepts to an MBA side. And then we have a distributed leadership course in our master's program. And then I've been working on trying to introduce some undergraduate courses in team sciences and in the leadership as well. So we have a couple of hybrid courses, but we're trying to expand those into other programs. And that's on the higher education side. And then there's internationally, we're working with the university over in the EU that they're taking. So we offer these courses online as well, and the university is taking complexity thinking as a course for 1 semester. They're taking the distributed leadership as another semester, and then the team science course as a 3rd semester for their leadership program.
Wow. You are doing that. You are teaching these courses. I mean, you are actually teaching the components of the flow system
Right.
at your university. Wow.
Right.
And what are the textbooks that you're using for when I mean, as far as other universities or at your university, like when they teach performance improvement, what are the textbooks they use for the youngsters?
Well, the traditional ISPI textbooks for HPT, I mean,
Right.
we use those in our undergraduate courses.
Mhm.
The graduate courses, mostly we do research articles, right? So we pull
Right.
from the research. So we do that more at the graduate level, master's and PhD. But as far as undergraduate for HPT, we use the standard textbooks that are in ISPI domain. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, sure. Next question is also very new that I never ask any guest on the
Okay.
interview. What is a meta-analysis technique? Can you give us like a
Or
nutshell? And
multi-level.
multi-level analysis and meta-analysis, but I'm more interested in meta-analysis.
Okay. Well, meta-analysis is a analysis of analyses,
I know, yeah.
right? So the part of the problem with research is if you do one study, you can't, some people try to change policy based on the results from one study. Well, that's one small sample, results from one small sample. So what you really need are lots of studies from a lot of various samples before you make any decisions or policies based on the research. And that's where meta-analyses come into play. So they do a large overview of a lot of similar studies and do an analysis on that to really find out what is needed. And so those are closer to this type of studies. So if you make any decisions or policy changes, then you want to do it based on meta-analyses rather than individual research studies. And then the multi-level analysis. So you have a single study at one level, and that tells you something about, say, an individual in an organization, but it doesn't tell you anything about the organization, right? And if you're doing an analysis of a team within an organization, well, that tells you something about the team, but it doesn't tell you anything about the organization. And if you're doing an analysis of an organization, well, that might tell you about an organization, but it doesn't tell you anything about what's going on inside. So when you look at things at multi-level theories are what needed, so, and that brings in all the individuals, similar to our distributed leadership theory, individuals, teams, multi-team systems, and organizations. So we're looking at 4 levels, right? And by doing that, you're able to look at the individual level and then how they interact with the team, and then how the team interacts with the individual, and then how the teams interact with the multi-team system, and the multi-team system interacts with the team, and then how they interact with the organization. So you're looking, going back to complex adaptive systems, it's the interactions, right? So the multi-level analysis allows you to look at how those interactions and how the one level influences the other and vice versa. And an individual level study, one study, you can't do that.
Thank you. Thank you. This the reason I want to ask this question is because it is going to be very important for our viewers. Right now, China has gone through a little bit more than 40 years of opening up and reform. And now, voila, you see the achievements. And well, you have been China, you have been Guangdong for 2 years. You've seen everything, you've seen it all. But early years, what year were you there in Guangdong?
I was in the mid 90s, probably 96, I'm guessing.
Okay, that's exactly the time when I landed on started my master's in the U.S. But
Okay.
you've seen it all, even though earlier, but now it's even more astonishing achievements. Right now, there's so many companies, they're trying to survive and then they're trying to flourish and trying to gain their market share in their own area. But there have been a lot of practices that not summed up. You know what I mean? They're
Yes.
not turning into theories, models, processes, and standards, or even theories. They're not doing that because they're busy.
They're
Busy,
reacting, right?
busy,
Yeah.
busy, and busy. Busy is like burying their heads in the hay,
Mhm.
just burying their heads in their own stuff. What I'm saying is multi-level analysis, meta-analysis, these are 2 important basic techniques that some of the practitioners on the front, they need to learn, and they need to spend some time aside, on weekends or something, like start to think, what would I leave after I leave this company? What legacy do I have? Do I have a legacy?
Right.
Each one of the employee, if they have an individual legacy, even they left the company, they leave the company, and then, you know what I mean? It'll be cumulative, and then all the knowledge and the wisdom will pile up, and then that will be escalated to organizational wisdom or organizational knowledge system. So that will help this organization fly. I mean, that will be the basis if the company want to fly. So that's why I'm asking these 2, because a lot of people are not paying attention, because a lot of viewers are on the front line trying to make both ends meet
Right.
every day on a daily basis. But I do want to draw their attention. Actually, let me say this to our viewers. Viewers, please pay a little bit more attention to research. This session is with Dr. John Turner. He's done a lot of research. He's very well cited, and he has a lot of works online, and you can find his works. The reason all the other 49 guests online, they're also very good scholars. They're practitioners, but they conduct research as well. That's why they're good at both. They're good at them. They make a lot of fortune, and then at the same time, they have a lot of achievements in theory, and they have left their names in the history of performance improvement, in the future of learning development. So they have made their own marks, their own legacy. So what I'm saying to you is that you can do that too. And the opportunity is historical. Historical, meaning after this one, probably not. You won't have the opportunity if you wanted to, or the competition it will be more keen. The difficulty, the level of difficulty will be even higher than if you want to do it now, because right now everybody is growing, and while you're growing, well, along the way, don't drop that what you have as treasures. Don't drop your treasures. Keep them, and keep them in good safe box, good safe, and then at the time, show it to us. So you have the equipment, you have the raw material. What we need is just a whole banquet of whole table of feast. So we're expecting you. So that's why I asked Dr. Professor Turner about this last question. It's a very basic question, but it is important to each one of you. Okay. Now I'm back to the John. Now I'm back to the so back to the interview. John, my next question is: how do you predict that this pandemic will impact our field?
That's a good question. I think some of the impacts we've already realized, and they will be long term. For example, interconnectivity and non-physical spaces, right? So before the pandemic, there was some virtual connectivity tools, Zoom and others, but they've now become more of a mainstay, right? More of a standard. And I think moving forward, even if
Right.
when employees start going back to the main office, it'll be a smaller, more purposeful designed office. Not everyone will be required to go into the office, but a lot of connectivity will be virtual, right? So I think some of those changes are we're already realizing they'll be more permanent, right?
Right.
But moving forward, I think lessons learned is there were weak signals identifying that the pandemic was possible on a global scale, right? And a lot of the country leaders in various countries, not just the US, kind of ignored those or just pushed them aside, right? And then look what happened, right? And then when we did realize that this is a true pandemic, we kind of, some countries did better than others, but on the grand scale, I think most of the countries and leaders kind of were behind the eight ball, right? And that's managing complexity because people really didn't know how to manage that. So I think moving forward, we can pay attention to more weak signals. So for example, if you look at some of the countries that are having problems right now with the pandemic, like India and Brazil, for example, there are a lot of variants from the virus coming out because a lot of people haven't been vaccinated. And so now these viruses are mutating into different versions. Those are weak signals that everyone really needs to pay attention to. So I think that the pandemic, not necessarily COVID-19, but the idea of a pandemic is going to be well into our future. So we have to learn how to kind of live with that. How do we live with differing versions of pandemic, right? Viruses. So that's just one step moving forward. The other lesson that we learned in managing, we came late, but it's repurposing. And that's kind of going back to the complexity thinking, is that you need to be able to repurpose things, right? So the manufacturers for perfume, for example, they repurpose their facilities to make oxygen machines or masks, right?
Right.
So that was a need for that. So organizations who are able to repurpose their products and their manufacturing lines to a new product, the ones who can do that quicker will be able to react to customer demands in the future, right? So it's not just a one process, Six Sigma for one process and stick to it. You have to be able to repurpose in your facilities to meet customer demands.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, a friend of mine, she wrote a book called Telecommuting about 20 years ago. And I talked to her, I said, well, now you read the, you need to, it seems like we need to redefine, you need to upgrade your book. It's
Right.
redefine telecommuting now.
Mhm.
So anyway, um, if you had a chance to start all over again, all of this all over again, what would you have done differently?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I'm in a good place now, and a lot of it's based on my experiences. I would have, I don't know. I mean, one answer would be I would have gone into this field quicker and got my
Mhm.
PhD sooner, but then the experiences I gained prior to back into academia benefit me today. So
Mhm, mhm,
I'm kind of in a good place. I think I would just I would do it again.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. I would expect that you would say, "Oh, I would have learned the way of Guangdong, Guangdong cooking, or the Canton cooking." Anyway, Canton cooking. Anyway, as a closing statement, John, do you have any advice to the young practitioners out there?
Yeah, one bit of advice I would say is, and I would say depth and breadth. And but what I mean by that is we need
Can you say that
expertise.
again?
Yeah, depth
Please?
and
Okay.
breadth. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So while we need expertise in certain disciplines, we still need to be a generalist in other disciplines.
Hmm.
And we need deep learning in certain areas rather than just watching YouTube videos because that's shallow, that's passive learning, right? We need deep learning in certain areas, but we still need to have a large breadth of knowledge in other areas. Okay.
Hmm.
So need to be a generalist with specific areas of expertise. And so I would recommend people beginning their career, whether it's in academia or as a practitioner, to become experts in certain areas, but still learn everything you can about other areas.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Depth and breadth. That's all everyone is craving for. So is trying to equip themselves with. So thank you, John. And tonight I learned something new, and I read about your flow system. I know is a new thing. How long have the flow system the flow system been in place?
We published it, right?
Yep, the book.
We published it right at the October of last year through our university press. We published the online guide. Prior to that, it's a free online guide, it gives an overview of the flow system and then the tools and methods within it. We
Right.
published that probably a year and a half ago. So
Hmm.
that it's been in the public domain for about a year and a half now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
So it's
now
very new.
yeah, and then now just since February, end of February, first part of March of this year, we started
Hmm.
offering online training, and we're certifying trainers, accrediting trainers to offer training face to face and online.
Right, right. I really what this is a wow, this is I really learned something new because this is new
Mm.
and we expect that more you can build more classic business cases, examples, and then uh teach us more kind of how to use it in the developing world, in other, fast growing companies and hyper growth companies, and then so that we can adopt it, because, we look for tools, because it's more right now the training sessions or education are more kind of a tool oriented. But on the behind, I always want to say to my viewers that methodology is how important methodology is. Now, through this interview with Dr. Turner to interpret us how the flow system is, how system works, you can see how important methodology is, because without methodology, you may still in the complexity domain, but you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
That is the last thing you want. Even become what you don't know, that's even better, because you know where to fight, where you put your next focus on. So anyway, I really learned a lot, so I hope you do too. Anyway, thank you, John. And this is a really a lot of things for me to digest also. And on behalf of the viewers, thank you again.
Right. Thank you. My pleasure.
And we'll be in touch. And then we really hope that in the future you can give us some overview, more kind of online sessions in the future.
Sure. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye, George. Appreciate it.
That's my interview with Dr. John Turner. How do you feel? I feel, again, I've learned a lot. During the past, just now during our interview, Dr. Turner and we spent nearly an hour just on the flow system, what it is, how does it work, and how the Helix system works, and what value does it create, and also we talk about the performance improvement and etc. And the impact of the pandemic into our field, etc. Thank you, Dr. Turner. And this flow system is indeed something very new. It's almost an invention. And we hope that a lot of our viewers can learn more and adopt them in their future performance improvement projects to create value efficiently, more value to their clients. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dr. Turner, and we look forward to hearing more from you. Next week, we are going to have, next week is going to be the last episode of our Training Master Series. Yes, will be episode 50. And to conclude, we are inviting someone very famous and very well known in our field to be the last guest, and his name is Dr. Dave Ulrich. Dr. Dave Ulrich is very well known. He is the inventor of the human resources 3 pillars model, and he's the he's the renowned professor from University of Michigan, and also he's also considered the father of modern human resources. He basically opened up modern human resources for this field. I mean, for all of the practitioners on planet Earth. And he also published more than 30 books. He won numerous awards, and he has global impacts. So next week, we're going to ask him a lot of questions around the future of human resources, including the future value of human resources, where it's going to be. And also, especially, we're going to spend more time on his newest work, which is called the Organizational Guidance System, OGS. What is it? What is it? What does it do? And what value does it create? What is the difference between OGS and the traditional 3 pillars, HR 3 pillars, etc., etc.? So you're more than welcome to log on and to participate this event. So until next week, please stay safe, stay tuned. Thank you, and good